leaf versus a lob lolly that boot speed, you get twice as much resin, and made twice as much product. In fact, the shorter the leaves kept going down, the less resin they put out. So short leaf pine was at the bottom, lob lolly in the middle, and long leaf was the king. So 96 million acres existed here in 1705 when England passed an act to create a bounty to persuade tar makers to come over here and start producing tar. Until that point, all the shipbuilders in England were getting their products from Sweden. It was called East Country tar. It was a fine, pretty tar made in a kiln, brick oven, or a rock oven over there. And of course, when the first tar makers came here, it was a whole different experience for them. Stop right here and ask you to forgive me because it's pollen season. It destroys my sinuses, but also destroys my mind. It's an all-body thing for me. So I'm dragging a little bit more than I usually do today. You just have to bear with me. What they were getting out of North Carolina in 1705 was a nasty product in tar. We talked about that this evening when we start making tar. But today here we're just going to prepare a tree for this fall when our fall festival comes. What we'll bring in here will be 4 to 5 times what you're seeing today. We have the barrels, the cooper's tools, the cooper's shop benches and stuff. And this year, right now, we're actually going into the tools and hemp rope and actually preparing a little boat so that we can actually show people how they put the tar and the hemp together and seal off the cracks in the ship. So we're working it from beginning to end. So by the time we get in the fall, we'll have all that for you. And you actually see how it started and where it ended up. How they actually used it in England. So, but turpentine in the beginning, later on in the late 1800s, when the rubber industry got to using turpentine, was probably its height in the late 1800s. But in the early days, 1700s, and you see we've got men here in the 17, 18, and 1900s because this product started out in small time. In the early days, they had cast iron steels, and you couldn't move a cast iron steel very well, so most of them were located down on the coast around Wilmington. It wasn't until the 1830s when they developed a copper steel that was lightweight that the farmers started taking those steels into the goods and producing turpentine themselves and barreling it and shipping it back up the river, or rafting it back up the river to Wilmington. And of course, I guess right here, do you just want me mainly to just go in, or you want me to do the whole thing? Turpentine in the early days was used, it was also used to paint thinner on the ship, but it was used externally for any pets, bruises, breaks, if you castrated a hog or whatever. I mean, they used it outside medicinally for everything wrong with it. Just like when I was a kid, you know, you put it on everything. And there's a list that long. But internally, they used it to get rid of worms. They used it for constipation, diarrhea. I can see how that would feel both. You drank it, you put it all over you. But the real kick up in turpentine came in the late 1830s. They had invented a lamp that burned turpentine and alcohol mixed. And that is called campane, C-A-U-P-H-E-N-E. Campane was more dangerous than any other chemical they ever burned in a lamp first lamps had a problem was that the flame could get to the fuse, and many of them exploded and killed more people accidentally than all other accidents combined in the 1840s. But later on, the second patent, they figured out a way to keep it from getting to the mixture. And campaign lit the streets of the world, it lit England, here, you name it. Everybody used turpentine alcohol in their plants because it burned very bright, gave you a good light. And people continued to use it even after, they had those accidents. So turpentine entered this part of the country in about the 1840s. Up until then, it was reserved for down toward the coast. Like I said, easy access was the key to any of this along the time farming. You need to be able to get your product to market. At that time, eastern North Carolina was known as Rip Van Winkle State because we were mostly wilderness. And there were not a lot of good roads. There was no railroads. There was the river. And so turpentine stills mainly grew up along the Cape Fear River, other rivers, where you could easily get your product down, put it on a log raft, and float it down the Wilmington where it sat on the docks and until you sold it to the British or to the folks up north or whoever bought it. Few uses of turpentine, but then later on in the late 1800s, rubber processing got used in turpentine, and then makeup, and then cosmetics, and just about any industrial type plant had a need for turpentine. So that's why it grew so large, and tar and pitch kind of faded out after the Civil War, because if you remember, they had a battle between the Monitor and the Virginia, and they were ironclads, and once that Monitor made it through a battle and didn't sink, or did, but didn't sink then, the entire world started shifting gears and producing ships out of steel instead of out of wood. So tar pitch and turpentine, the tar pitch trade dwindled down, and turpentine took its place in the late 1800s as the big industry. What I'm going to show you here today, we're going to box a tree, face a tree, and each step I'll tell you how they did it. But in 1860s, 70% of all the naval stores used in the entire world to build ships went down the Cape Fear River in North Carolina. So that tells you how big it was. And turpentine was just like everything else. It was a fever. And the more books I read, the more I realize some people made money at it, some people didn't make money at it. And it was like anything else. You had to really study it and study nature to understand how to make a profit out of it. And the resin in this tree is separate from the sap. The sap comes up through the light colored wood on the sap wood on the outside and feeds the leaves and limbs. We call what you make turpentine out of is called resin. Resin has its own tubes that form from the center of the tree. This tree has a natural defense system. Anytime a bug drills into that tree, those resin tubes open up and it'll push them back out and fill the crack back there. If you're walking through the woods, you see little white dots on the tree, the resin dots. That's where it's pushed the beetle back out and sealed itself up. If lightning strikes this tree and knocks a limb off of it, this tree is designed, I say by God, to actually send that resin. There's little tubes inside the tree that come to the heart that sends that resin out to that area and coats it off. So if you run into one with a lawnmower, or your wife's back into one with a pickup truck or whatever, seals itself over, and you've got a white coating on the outside of it. Well, they figured out to get that resin to come forth, you had to injure the tree. And when you injure the tree protects itself naturally. And so if you continue to go back and injure that tree every week, you can collect resin. This is some we've collected this year. So you'll be able to see, if you want to pass this around, I brought the big one so you can really see what resin looks like. It's not in the beginning stages when you first streak the tree, which is what we call when we make the chevrons, they call it streaking the tree with a hack. It brings forth, of course, first some fluid, water fluid, which is the sap. But shortly after, those tubes are severed in there, and when you sever those tubes, it allows that resin to come forth. Now, something very interesting that I didn't know, and I'm see if I can find I've left it somewhere. You see, I didn't come down today prepared really good. Anywhere that resin touches that pine tree, other than it's in that tube, it causes the area of that pine tree that it touches to turn to fat lighter. Now, are y'all familiar with fat lighter or lighter wood? See, I usually tie this all together with tar making, so I'm going in reverse today. That's why I'm having to think, because we usually start off with tar. Because we're talking about the heart of the tree being light, where you get your tar from. But if you ever been walking through the woods and found a tree heart with a broken limb still attached to it, you ever seen that? There's a limb sticking out, pine tree. That limb broke in the storm. That tree sent resin down that limb to seal off the end of it, and when it did, it turned that limb to light. In fact, in Sweden, when they made tar, they didn't pick up the heartwood like we do in the forest and cook gas. They actually left the pine tree standing and took tools similar to this scraper and pulled the bark off of it as high as they could reach all the way around, and left about 6 inches on the north side, which kept the tree living for about 2 years. And that wood, that outside wood, would fill with resin and turn it to light. Then they would come back in, cut the tree down, block it up, put that in the kiln, sweat it, and that's where they made their really pretty Swedish tar. The problem with that was that Sweden had a monopoly on it, because England had nearly depleted their forests. So they were buying everything from Stockholm Company in Sweden, and the price was going up, 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 up. So they'd come over here to turpentine. They came here to make tar. Turpentine came later. Some at the same time, but really actually later it became big. But so when you hack that tree in a V, many of you seen these trees, and you know those V's go right on up the tree. Why'd you have to do it every week? Because that tree seals itself off and turns that area to lightwood. So you move above that to the next set of tubes and cut those and then start running there. But if you go back where you just cut, you can't cut it, make it run, because it's solid in there now. It has actually filtered out and filled in those cracks. It stopped itself from being injured there again. It's almost like a callus on you, or you know, after a while it gets hard where it can't be destroyed again. So in the early days when they started, they didn't just box the tree on one side. They boxed it, moved over 6 inches, boxed again, moved over 6 inches, boxed again. A tree this size, they would probably just put two, one on the front, one on the back. This did not destroy the longleaf. Contrary to what people think, when you streak a tree and box a tree, it does not kill the tree. And I'm going to say this over and over and over so it resonates. That tree has a natural defense system. It's prepared for you to hit it inside, tear it up, run through it with a skidder. That's why you find so many trees. Now if you do it too close together all the way around, of course, any tree will die. But these pines are prepared for what we're doing to them. Now, I've never killed a tree doing this, but I won't swear we won't be cutting this down next year. I tell everybody that right from the start. I'm a 2-year man. I can't tell you after 2 years, but I can tell you that we've farmed some of my trees 2 years and we've not even seen a brown needle. So from what I can tell you and study on it and everything, what did kill the trees, I'm going to let you pass these around while we're starting the box and everything. And you'll understand better. Well, all right. Let's start it like this. I'm going to get these pictures out and let you pass these around and just switch them from places. You see a box filled with resin there. And then you'll see some of the trees we're farming in the house. Who's going to work this tree? Are y'all going to continue to work it? Yeah. This is from a log lolly in 3 days. That's the type system I use. That's the can that I just fruited off the tree. And I cut that tree about 3 days ago. So that's what you can expect from a loblolly. Now, legend says and the books say that this is supposed to do twice that, so you'll have to check it every other day. After the tree runs about, I can tell you this from experience, that after the tree runs 3 days, it sort of shuts down and it doesn't run anymore, it kind of weeps. The reason they didn't come back around them, but every week, and cut a new street, they called it, was because the average farm was 10,500 trees. And you work those trees every week. So I don't care how many hands you had or whatever, 10,500 trees took you over a week to get through, and I'm sure they didn't work them all every week. But so they went through, cut them, came back a week later, cut them. 3 or 4 weeks, the box would be cut to hold about a quart of resin. So every 3 or 4 weeks, you had a dipper come by. And they simply took a bucket, wooden bucket. A lot of times ladies and children did, and just shoved it down in that box and flipped out the resin. And usually about a month's work. Now, if you notice in that can I sent around, if you notice that you touch that and see that this is what it feels like, because it's not what you think. It runs in here a liquid, but after a couple of days, it solidifies. So you have to take something hard like this and point it. I use a wood chip. Now, I used to use a spoon to get it out of my can, but it wasn't stiff enough, and it just kept bending the spoon and stuff. So I went to a little dip, and you have to break it loose and pull it out. And you'll see that in that can. That's why I brought that one right off the tree. That's how we collect it. But then if you look in that bucket, you'll notice that actually when you put it together, it softens back up. The reason it softens back up is it's back in oil. Resin out of the pine. Here we go. Let me look at that again now that I'm on that part. See that glistening oil in there? That's called a volatile oil. See it ran away from the resin. That's what makes turpentine, is the oil in the resin. The volatile oil. And being volatile, if it stays on the outside of the tree too long, on the face of the tree and thinned out, the oil will dry out of it. That's why in the fall, these trees, you saw some pictures in here where they had whited over. They use that also. That's called scrape. If you've ever heard of scrape turpentine, you had a soft and a hard. That was the hard in the fall, because about September, last September, October, as soon as the weather cools down, the resin stops running. Turpentining was a summer project. When you're sweating, the resin's running. If you're not out here and it's not hot and humid, it'll run maybe a drop or two in your can, and it just quits. If the weather cools off that evening, it stops running. Just like if you go lay a piece of lumber out in the sun and go pick it up and you get resin on your hand, where it's actually the heat draws it out. So you didn't turpentine in the winter, but you prepared for turpentining in the winter and the spring, and then when it came time, when it got 90 degrees, you got ready to go to work, and you worked until, well, it was actually 32 weeks. Some books say 26, some say 32. But anyway, somewhere between 26 and 32 streaks would be at this tree in the season. The first season, you got this white, pretty resin out of the tree. That was called virgin dip. That was the most expensive because it made the best turpentine and made twice as much of it because it had the volatile oil left in it. Once it dries out in the fall, on the face of the tree, they go back in the wintertime and they, I've got another picture in a minute I'll show you. They had something called a scrape box that they set up against a tree and took a scraper like that and scraped wood and everything into that box, put that in barrels and took it back to the distillery. There's something to do in the wintertime. It paid half as much and it made half as much turpentine because the oil had dried out of it as it dried on the tree, so it wouldn't produce as much turpentine. That's why they called it scrape, because they scraped it off. Okay.
So they would distill it on.
Yeah, they would distill it. Yeah, in a steel, just like alcohol. And this is our baby steel. This is what we use to make turpentine. Since it took the resin out of 280 boxes every month to fill up a 32-gallon barrel of resin like this. This barrel is an exact reproduction of what Fred Olmsted left description of in his writings when he was in North Carolina. So we took his own words, his own script, and sent it to one of my friends who makes barrels. And he said they were mainly straight. They were bound with oak strips. And that's the exact size and measurement and height and everything of a in-wood turpentine barrel. Now you had several different kinds of barrels. You got a barrel like this in the woods that once you collected, they were spaced out in what they call drifts. You had a 10,500 tree farm, but it was divided by roads for the carts to run through and collect. About 2,000 trees made what they called a drift. And each drift was sectioned out. You had section 1, 2, 3, and they'd work those different days of the week or whatever. And these barrels were placed along that road in intervals, so turpentine workers could gather resin, walk out to the road, dump it. Then when they filled them up, of course, a ox cart or a wagon, or I guess later on a pickup truck, and pick them up, carry them to the state.
Is that why you used tramways? Was that where tramways came? Or they used wooden railroads wooden ties to?
I'm sorry, I talk, but I can't hear.
Is that where tramways came in? Where they put wooden tracks and forest trees to?
That was timber. That was most of the after they finished turpentining woods and reached as high as in the early days, they went right on up the trees. They put these tools on a longer handle, go right on up. But like I said, that virgin liquid dip that they called it, virgin dip, was the high price moneymaker. It didn't take them long to later figure out that they were wasting their time going way up the tree, because as I'll explain to you in a minute with this pot system, one of the advantages of that was that you can move that up the tree. The box was stationary, so no matter how far you went up, you still had to run down and gather in that box. Now in France and places like that, they didn't cut a hole in the tree, they dug a hole in the sand below the tree and let the resin run down and gather in the sand hole. But that wasn't good enough for us, that wouldn't work. We had plenty of men and axes and trees, it didn't make no difference. And you had to do something all winter with your help. Well, in November through February, March, when the sap went down, we're going to do it today, and I've done it at home, so bear with me. When the sap went down and you needed something to do in the winter time, they made tar, pitch, and cut boxes and prepared for the next season. Because you leased farms, even if you had your own farm, you wanted to get in the business big, you leased somebody's farm, but you didn't lease it. I mean, and we're talking junk woods down in the bottoms and stuff where they couldn't actually farm. They would lease that to turpentine. And you leased it by the box, not by the tree. So if you had a tree that had 6 boxes, that counted 6, okay? And they actually counted the boxes, and it was like most of them averaged about $25 a year paying for a farm. Turpentine in 1860 reached $4 a barrel. A 32-gallon barrel was running $4. That's comparable to what oil is today. And that tells you why. Remember I told you it took the resin out of 280 pounds to fill up one of these barrels in wood. That would make 8 gallons of turpentine. 32-gallon barrel was 8 gallons in steel, and you had 7, 9, and 11 barrel steel. So that tells you how much you would have to gather even today to run off a full-size steel. That's why we use a baby steel. Okay, we can produce little bits, but we don't have access to enough trees to produce anything more than that. We'll go ahead and go through the whole story with you, then we'll move over to the tree. What happened to the longleaf pine and drove North Carolina out of the business? They depleted the pines, but the way the business was done, once you had turpentine a farm as high as you could reach on the trees or whatever, and there was no more turpentining to be done unless you got a ladder. I mean, you know, the next process was to cut timber. So when a man had leased his farm, all it could be turpentine or whatever, then they went in and cut the timber, which was the other naval store that's not talked about as much, was straight long timber for masts, decking and sideboard, and England used that also to build the ships. So a man would build a log raft, haul his products down the raft, take them down to Wilmington where he would sell the tar, pitch, turpentine, and the logs and the rope, hemp rope, and walk back home. Now from where we're at, it took them about 2 weeks after they sold everything, unless they needed to buy a mule or something for the farming, and they bought that mule and rode back. But the majority of the time they walked back from Wilmington. What river do you have here that they would have used? There's no major river.
I think they would have taken it by wagon over to Fayetteville and put it down the Cape Fear. Mm-hmm.
turpentine steels would explode. So that's why it's one close to a wooden pan. They didn't have pressure gauges. It's very flammable. I can attest to that. And you had one old man that sat there at the steel that paid him. Oh, back up a minute. If you cut these boxes November through February, you were required a task was what you did every day. Your task for that day paid 50 cents a day. And you were to cut 100 boxes a day. Now I'll let you swing that axe if you want to, but one of them put me in a hospital nearby. Pine trees don't look hard until you start doing what we're doing and you realize how hard a pine tree is. It's not a soft wood till it lays on the ground a while. And but that was your task. That's what they called it, a task. Cut 100 boxes a day for 50 cents. So that guy that sat by the steel and listened to the steel, he had his fire under it or took fire away. They didn't have a pressure gauge, he listened to it. And that's why they called him a